Welcome to Take Brain Stoke with your girl Flavilla Phone Gang. And today I'm going to fuel your brain with some bomb knowledge. Are you ready? Let's do it. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Tech Brainstalk. I am super excited because today we're going to talk about a subject which is super important, which is research and development. So how can research and development keep your tech business more resilient? And I think that's something that people really underestimate the importance of innovation, but also constantly cultivating a curious mind. And I'm super lucky because today I have with me Matthew Duhig. Let me tell you something about Matthew. We can call him Matt as well. So Matt started FX Digital as a website development company from his home in 2011. I always like when people say they started from home because most successful businesses start from home and feel like, where else can they start? His partner, Tom. So as the business steadily grew, the option would have been to really to stick to what they knew, which is web design and build. But no, that's not Matt. So what Matt decided to do, say, hey, we're going to go further than that and really just embrace and invest in technology and make sure that we actually also not only impacting positively on business, but also on society. Matt is really now a pioneer. We're going to talk about a business that most people are not familiar with, which is voice technology and innovative OTT TV solutions in the UK digital scene. His achievement with FX Digital, we should check them out, demonstrate both entrepreneurial spirit and drive for change and advancement in the emerging tech space. Matt, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thanks. Really good. Sort of just coming out of this bank holiday weekend. I spent a lot of time with my niece and nephew over the weekend, so I'm shattered, but otherwise in a good place.
Getting you ready to be the next dad, the best dad to be, if you know really want.
Oh no, I like having a niece and nephew because I can just give them back after a day.
I know the feeling. I'm exactly like, it's like, okay, take your child back, and I'm go back to my quiet, nice place at home. But yes, I think, it's funny because the first time we spoke about now was a couple of weeks, actually a month ago, I think, something like that. And I was fascinated by your journey. So usually I start by, asking people to tell their journey, at the end of the podcast. But I think it's important people understand exactly how that led you to where you are right now. Do you mind telling the story?
Yeah, of course. So I started the business with my best friend, Tom, basically. So me and Tom knew each other from school and then went to university near each other. So I went to university in Southampton and Tom went to university in Portsmouth. And then during university, we basically started getting interest in sort of development and design. So I was a bit of a budding developer, and my sister at the time opened a wedding shop and needed a website for her wedding shop. I couldn't design. I'm not particularly creative, so I called upon my best mate Tom or Smith, and he basically did the logo and the site design, and then handed it over to me, and I built it. After developing that site for my sister, we then went on to build some more sites. My sister recommended us to some sort of other bridal shops. So carved out a bit of a niche at the time. And this was all done whilst we were still studying at university. Once we finished university, we were, I guess, somewhat unfortunate to finish university in the middle of a global recession. So we both went out and got internships, but the internships that we had were, I think we joke because at the time it cost us more money to get into work than it did that we were actually making at work. So we're making a loss going to work. And then decided after a while to basically sort of stop that there and then pursue what we called at the time a different name, but what is now FX Digital. And it started as website design and build. We grew a real expertise in the content management system WordPress, and then started to build out sites using that. We built frameworks and processes that really accommodated that setup. But from day one, really, we started properly, we always say 2014, 2015, which is when we moved into our office and hired our first team member. And that first team member was research and development. So really, we wanted to invest in research and development from day one, which I'll obviously talk about lots more later. And that investment opened us up to loads of new opportunities in different technologies. And we looked across VR, AR, but also technologies like WebGL, which is 3D rendering in the browser. And then over the past, say, 3 or 4 years, that investment in technology has helped us to realize the potential of voice and TV application development as well. And they're now 2 of the real core services that we offer as a business. And we've gone from a team of 2 people, like I say, about 5 or 6 years ago, and we're now up to around 35 people, mainly developers, but with a really strong design team as well, and then a QA team. And we're now pushing ahead and looking ahead into next year. We're sort of anticipating further growth within the business.
Great. This is great. And I think a lot of people first think, what the hell is voice technology? People who don't know voice technology, what should they understand first of all, and what should they care about?
The way I try and explain it is voice is another way of accessing information. So People often compare it to websites and, other ways of accessing information like VR and AR, but you really can't. Like, it's just a completely different way of getting a hold of information. A lot of people that potentially can't use computers, can't use keyboards, can't use a mouse, traditionally have relied on using their voice to dictate to a computer. And nowadays we have smart speakers and other devices like mobile phones that come with these voice assistants already installed onto them. And the most popular ones you'll know are Alexa or Google Assistant. And as developers, we can basically build what are called skills, which are similar to, I guess, applications on a mobile phone. And those skills can be installed by the users onto their voice assistants, and they give that voice assistant additional capabilities. So, for example, if you've got a brand that sells pizzas, you might create a voice skill for Alexa that allows someone to reorder their favorite pizza from your shop. And as developers, we can build those skills.
That's amazing. And what do you believe, what kind of companies will benefit the most of using this technology? Is it for everybody, or do you have certain preferences or believe it works better for certain type of companies?
Yeah, of course. So the space itself is still in its infancy. So it's going through this sort of phase at the moment of finding its feet and really understanding the best applications for the technology. At the moment, I'd say where it really does have a great effect are the example I gave just then. So when you're repurchasing or reordering something you regularly get. So in the case of a pizza, if it's your favorite pizza, it's quite easy to just reorder that pizza. Alternatively, if you're making a booking for an event, for example, and the sort of options in that booking are relatively limited, it works really well. But also, and where we find most of our success is content creators. So people that create content for children's television, for example, they might want to adapt that content for a voice experience, particularly as children are probably the pioneers of voice technology, which is fascinating.
Really? Tell us more.
Yeah, it really is. The kids, like, if you look at the different sort of skills that are being developed for these technologies and the demographic of the people that are using the technology, it's the children. I mentioned my niece and nephew, but I'm always fascinated by, going around my sister's house and just seeing how they interact with Alexa.
Yeah.
And what I always find fascinating is how polite they are. And I don't think that's just because they're good kids. I think they're just strangely polite to the device because they're interacting with it as if it's a human. Whereas when I listen to adults interact with Alexa, it's very much more command driven and barking orders, less of a conversation, more of an order.
That is so true. We do have a much more demanding approach when it comes to, I'm not going to say collab because I have Alexa at home. She might just wake up and I've activated the whispering mode so she can.
Well, I try to intentionally say thanks and please to Alexa and Google Assistant now because I feel bad if I don't.
I love that. I don't know how far we're going to go, but I think that relationship with our, IoTs are going to go further and further, and that's what I like the most. And I think one thing that people can learn a lot about what you've explained, and it's the title of this episode, is research and development is so important. So people are thinking, okay, yes, I'm good at what I do right now, and I don't want to tap anywhere else. This is it. I want to be known for that and nothing else. What would you say to them?
I think it's a huge risk personally. So if I think about our journey and where we are now and, where most of the revenue for the business comes, it's from voice and TV, which are those two real sort of showcase technologies we work with now that were discovered through our R&D efforts. And if we hadn't have adapted to sort of the times and moved our offering into that, we'd still be offering sort of relatively, reusable and repurposable websites. And that's sort of something that a lot of people do out there. And the competition for that is so fierce that it drives the value of that down, which makes it really, really difficult to be able to competitively price something and deliver something to a good standard. So yeah, by reinvesting in sort of technology and the team, we've been able to bring on these new technologies, which have really opened up loads of opportunities for the business.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly what you said. Innovation always help you not only stand out and also, as I said, be there and tap on opportunity that may not be yet available for everybody because you are the only one in the market. But I mean, okay, we talk about R&D, which is quite important, but what's your methodology or approach to, R&D? And do you have a strategy in terms of how much money you spend and all?
Yeah, of course. This is something we actually discuss all the time as a team. So it's really difficult when you're a technology-led team that's primarily made up of developers to carve out an R&D team and avoid the temptation of putting them on loads of project work. And we've had, loads of instances in the past where we have, a strong R&D team and then they get caught up on project work because it's hard to draw that line at where R&D ends and project work begins. Mm-hmm. And generally what we do today is we try to basically specify small projects that the feasibility of it's unknown. So, and it goes over to the R&D team. We pose a question, and it's, can you answer that question through some research and development? It also ties quite heavily into some of the product stuff that we do as a business. So, investing in repeatable systems and processes and that sort of stuff too. So you have to silo it off a little bit and give them that sort of dedicated time to just invest in R&D and avoid the temptation of pulling them into other project work, which is really challenging.
Yes. And do you think that as well, the element also giving, some form of deadline helps you make sure that you try and very fast and then move on to the next quickly?
Completely. When we first started doing research and development, we had this attitude of, we won't track it too much. We'll just let you guys crack on with it and hopefully we find some cool stuff. Generally, that didn't work. So what we found is that even if you don't have a real life client, it's always good to have a client on a project for the R&D team. And what that generally means here is that we try and get other members of the team internally involved in the project. Good example might be our marketing manager. So our marketing manager gets really involved in some of the earlier voice projects we did. So we did loads of cool voice stuff to try and showcase how we could potentially repurpose the NHS coronavirus Q&A stuff that's on the website into a voice skill. To do that, we assigned our marketing manager as the client of that project, and he was responsible for feeding back to the R&D team, as to whether or not it was exactly what he wanted, and that helped drive the project forward. Without that client, you tend to find that projects and R&D go stale. Yeah, you really do need it.
I love that. And I think you mentioned, I was about to ask you a question around what makes a great R&D team. You mentioned having a marketing person. You mentioned having a product development. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, generally our R&D team is quite technical. So they're quite technically strong, but they basically lean on other members in the sort of wider team and bring them in as and when they need. So what we tend to find is we have one or two people that are the core of the R&D offering. And then they involve other members of the development team or the design team, or I mentioned our marketing manager, or perhaps myself and Tom, in projects as and when needed. I think what's important though is that those people that are the core of the R&D team need to be really curious. They need to be inquisitive. They need to want to read documentation. A lot of what they're doing is ingesting APIs and working out how they work and what they expect. So yeah, they have to be really curious and really up for challenges and learning and reading.
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely important, even just as a CEO or running a business, to cultivate that curious mind and always want to ask why. And I always say to people that, quite often you have to unlearn everything that you know and don't make any assumption. And I think sometimes the reason why people are unable to see innovation is sometimes they get numb to a situation and they accept the pain. I know it's not terrible to say that, but sometimes, if you look at Uber or you think about, all the companies, they were able to see that, well, actually, we should not accept you have to pay a fortune.
Yeah, it's really hard to shake that. I think you mentioned it earlier. It's really easy just to accept that, we're in this position, we're doing well. That's it. Let's just stop. Let's stop striving for innovation. Let's stop pioneering these random technologies. We could be a much more profitable business if we didn't invest so heavily in our R&D in the short term, but in the long term, we would, be nowhere near as successful as we are.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to get first, always allocate a budget for that. Obviously, no matter where you are, I think it's, as soon as you start making money or as soon as you're making a return, reinvest that money in the right places. And research and development is obviously part of it. As you mentioned, Matthew, you've done really well. You could have just stayed, in website design and development because that's what you were good at. But I think it's also your ability to see where the market is going. So, look up. What's going on in the market?
Yeah, and that's really tricky, especially now, because we often find that the best way of getting abreast of technology that's sort of like emerging is to get out of the office and go out there and go to these events and, speak with people. And, we do a lot, not necessarily exhibiting at events, but just attending. So, we invest in our staff to go to conference days. And I think last year I was in, Amsterdam, I think it was for IBC. And we're just trying to sort of see what is out there and what other technologies are available to us. And then once we get a little spark, we're back in the office and then working with the team to see what we can do with that technology. And right now, during a pandemic, it makes it really difficult. It makes it really tricky. So you're then relying on the virtual format of these events, which is tough because a lot of the time, the cool ideas and the cool technologies you're exposed to aren't necessarily from the talks. They're from the people you meet at the event. Like you'll bump into someone and they'll throw some random technology and you're like, that's really cool. We should look at that. And it's tough to get that from a virtual event.
Absolutely. I think what I miss the most is the hugs, first of all, like meeting people and I can hug them without them being concerned. But you're right, like those conversations that you have, I'm like you, I'm a people person. I love, speaking to new people every time because I think you can learn from a lot of, of individuals. And that's why it happens. It's not so much when you're sitting and you passively listen to what somebody says, it's what happens afterwards when you exchange ideas. And I think that's something we're missing a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the voice projects that we've completed and how that offering has grown within our business, that was actually an intern that come to us 4 years ago now, I think, and just introduced us to the world of Alexa. And that just sort of like sparked something in us. And from then on, we sort of started investing quite heavily in that technology.
Absolutely. And so really, I'm like you as well. I had some really great interns in my company that really shaped new ideas. And I think really people really underestimate the importance of having young people think differently in team that I work with. And I always advise my clients as well to just have young Gen Z to come and say exactly things as they are. And it's really helpful.
Yeah, it's really good. Like, we're quite a young team, and that wasn't necessarily intentional. It was because as we grew as a company, we hired junior and trained because we couldn't afford the senior employees. So we're now in a position where, most of our team are still younger than me, and I'm 31. But we do actually have, probably more recently, I'd say in the last year or two, some more mature members of the team. But their mindset is brilliant. It's like they're completely on board with, the mentality of the younger guys, where it's, all out there trying to find the latest craze and the coolest thing, to the point where I think one of our team members, one of the older team members, is really active in all the hackathons and sort of, not extracurricular stuff that we do. And, he's probably got a younger mindset than most of the team, and he's twice our age.
Absolutely. I think when you match your passion for what you do with your job, I think you never stop. You have to literally ask them and say, like, can you please go home?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
can you just get off Slack, please?
Yeah. It is like that. Yeah. One of our team members in particular, well, actually the chap that heads up the R&D team, often slacks me on a Saturday and a Sunday, and I have to actively try to refrain from getting sucked into the passion and the excitement and just reply with, stop working, chill out. He's 100 miles an hour, always thinking about really cool stuff, and it's incredible. But I think it's important to switch off and have that bit of downtime, because otherwise it can become overwhelming.
Absolutely, it can drive you crazy. And I think creative people by nature always have something else in their mind, and I have to stop myself and just write on a piece of paper and just if I have enough time, because it's so easy to be distracted, and you realize, there's a lot of people around the world like that start an idea and never finish it because they want to do it at the same time. So don't really, spread yourself thin and just focus on one thing.
Yeah.
I want to ask a last question before we end the first part of this episode, but really, where do you think voice technology is going? What do you think is the future of voice technology?
Oh, such a good question. So I think voice has a couple of big problems at the moment. One of them is probably the one that frustrates me the most, is discoverability. So as the technology grows and, we developers create new custom skills for these devices, they have to be installed. So how do people find these skills? Because there's no Google search engine for voice skills. You have to sort of hear about it on an advert or some brand marketing. So I think there's a big question around, how do we make these experiences, these skills more discoverable? And I know Alexa and Google Assistant are doing a lot to try and improve that at the moment. As that becomes better and sort of these skills are more organically installed onto people's devices, I think the potential is massive. So I mentioned some use cases before. I think the biggest one for us as an agency is bringing content to voice. Some content is just better suited to voice. And then at the moment we're chucking it through websites. And it's that's just because that's the format that's always been there, that we've always used. But, really, maybe booking a ticket should be done over voice. Why should we have to crack open a website if it's a simple, train ticket? And I think the applications for technology are enormous. And me personally, everyone talks about, will it be Google Assistant? Will it be Alexa that wins out on the voice wars? Personally, I think, there's a future where they all exist, where they can exist in sort of unison. So for me, I've got a Google Assistant at home, and I find that is a really good source of news. But when it comes to doing things in the house, it just seems to fail, struggle. So I personally would love to have a device that had both installed, and I'd get Alexa to manage my lights or, turn my kettle on, and then I'd get Google to give me the latest news and tell me about my calendar. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up for the technology. And, we're in the very first 5% of what is even possible doing with the technology. And it's such early days for it that the scope is quite enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you said that, Matthew, but actually you might be the one actually develop what frustrates you the most. That might be the next phase of your R&D. Who knows?
Yeah.
Feeling the right way. I think, it's exactly what you say, Svinia. And, sometimes we do perceive people who do the same thing as competition. But I think if we have a bigger picture, which is really supporting our customer, there should be a way where we can really work alongside each other, where you can actually have Alexa and Google as well at the same time,
Yeah.
so. And you're right, when it comes to, discovering. I mean, I know my Alexa probably, I don't use it to its best, probably just looking at songs and just telling me the news and telling me when my delivery has arrived.
Yeah.
Probably the only thing that I do, but and I'm sure there's a lot of things that can be discovered. And I think comes back to, I mean, it's not really much about that, but I love what you just said. I think is, tapping in terms of where your customers are and then redirecting them to this option is the way it needs to be. But that was a great, I really love this episode. That sums up the end of part one. And preparing a couple of seconds.